I've listened to this Kundalini meditation video for about 4 nights, maybe 5, non-consecutive days, and I would get tingles in my lower back and my scalp, my forehead. But last night I had like tremors, like I would just feel my arm jolt. If it's just a rare phenomenon, but so far from what I've read or seen, one guy in a video said that you experience a sort of psychosis because your mind is trying to handle all the trauma you ever went through, and I guess it all resurfaces. And some people can't tell reality from fiction. I'm not for sure. But when you have 2 teenagers, you need to be in your right mind to raise them. So I immediately turned it off when I felt the tremors. I want to do more research. So I came across this story, and he says he went through 7 years of weirdness. Steve B. Howard. And he says, just to make it clear, I don't believe in the woo-woo anymore. Okay, so they went to this session in Oregon. Some kirtan was playing in the background, a sitar, warbling, singing, and some chanted mantras maybe. Nothing he recognized at the time. He told them to close their eyes, relax, and meditate in whatever way they felt comfortable doing. Behind closed eyes, I saw wild blue ropes of energy shoot from my hands and the top of my head. Waves of heat shooting up my body caused me to mildly convulse. Suddenly, involuntary deep breathing pulled the energy up my spine, and this wild energy snake uncoiled into spectacular visions. The Buddha's face in gold, a rainbow pulsing from my solar plexus. The eye melted into the indescribable and exploded into simple lightness. Calmness descended. Bathed in the knowing, I sat there smiling. Afterwards, I went up to my friend and said, "Wow, who needs drugs?" I asked him about my experience, but he just said that it was great that I had had it and to keep meditating. Since he was also from a Zen background, and because their attitude towards these sort of things during meditation has always been ignore the fireworks and keep meditating, I assumed this is what he meant and went back to my old meditation routine once my wife and I returned to Japan. He was having strange, blissful sensations, and his body would writhe and jump around on the button, making it very hard for me to continue the stoic breath counting style meditation that he had practiced for years. He considered the help of a Buddhist monk. He spent the next 7 years traveling to Australia to do a week-long meditation retreat. He did some traditions called the Turiya state. I've never heard of this one.
Turiya. Turiya. Turiya.
Turiya. The state beyond deep, dreamless sleep in which the superconscious becomes overtly active. So according to Swami, Turiya is the 4th state of consciousness and the final liberation from ego consciousness, and is united with infinite spirit. On October 28, 2009, he read a passage in a book titled The Doctrine of Vibration. It basically said, Shiva is everything. Everything is bliss. Suddenly he realized that if everything in the world is Shiva and Shiva is bliss, then everything must be bliss. At the moment of that realization, the entire room where I was reading became filled with bliss. All the objects became vibration of deep bliss and joy and part of me. Later on, I would realize how appropriate it was that I was sitting on the toilet at the time. For 21 days after that, I experienced everyone and everything as bliss and joy. Imagine being in a great mood every waking moment because everything seemed to be this ecstatic joy radiating from within you. That's what it was like for him the entire time. After the 21st day, the bliss slowly began to wear off, and he returned to a normal state of mind, though he could still access that intense bliss and joy if he concentrated. Another odd occurrence that began happening were night visions. For about a month, every time he would lay down to sleep and close his eyes, he would feel a strong tingling, almost like electricity, in the center of my brow. I actually feel that right now. Just above my eyes, where the third eye, or Ajna chakra, is supposedly located. As soon as his tingling started, I would start having strange visions of alien-looking worlds and sometimes other beings. That's interesting. I saw a gray alien one time immediately when I closed my eyes. And every day after that, I just asked for God to protect me, and I hadn't seen any more aliens. I also felt like I was flying sometimes. I felt that last night. I turned off the music, and afterwards I just laid there, and then I felt like I was flying, floating above me. I never spoke with the aliens or made contact, but sometimes it did seem as if they were aware of me. Creepy. The gray alien I saw was right in my face, probably a foot from me. And during the entire time I was wide awake, the night visions would usually last about 10 to 30 minutes. After they were over, I would stay awake for another 20-30 minutes thinking about them. The visions lasted for about 1 month, and then after that only came occasionally, maybe once or twice a month. They were always interesting and pleasant, and I looked forward to them, and of course these coupled with the Turiya state, I'm gonna have to look into that, find out what it is, I had experienced made me think that I was making rapid progress, that I was well on my way to achieving enlightenment. So he started thinking that he wanted him to recruit followers. He was pretty disappointed because he was just hoping to discuss his progress and get some advice about all the things that were happening to him. When he told him he didn't know if it would be popular in Japan, he stood up and said he had to meet one to have lunch. It felt very much like a brush off to me. At this point, he was having delusions of grandeur. He felt enlightenment and felt like he could become a guru. He said all these books and had strong signs that he was at least very close to achieving enlightenment. He had described all of these experiences to the teacher and was hoping for some recognition. But he would only say things like, that is very good, but never explain in detail what any of it meant or really provide me with such encouragement or guidance. The typical dangle the carrot technique of con men, I later found out. Then in December of 2014, everything at the ashram blew up. It came out that the guru had been secretly having affairs with several of the married women at the ashram, all the while maintaining for decades that he was a celibate swami, and even after he publicly admitted to the affairs, he at first tried to explain it away, saying this has always been a tantric tradition, indicating that his affairs had been of a spiritual nature, not simply the actions of a horny old man taking advantage of his position of power at the ashram. At this point, he gave up on the whole thing. I figured if a guy like that who supposedly achieved enlightenment in 1972 could fool that many people for so long, then it's probably all bullshit. I decided it was no better than the fake martial arts masters that had fooled everyone until MMA came along in the 90s and showed what a bunch of crap it all was. Conclusions. I can't say that it was all bad, though. I do cherish the amazing psychedelic experiences I had. I wrote and eventually published a novella based on many of these experiences. and I have maintained a strong meditation practice, though secular one now. I wish, though, that the scientific community would step up and provide some better explanations for what causes these experiences. When it first happened to me, I did look for a possible medical or scientific explanation, partially because I was half afraid maybe I'd somehow done permanent brain damage to myself. I didn't find any articles until much later that really provided a very satisfying explanation. It may do some good in the world, but a lot of them are also full of sociopaths and spiritual used car dealers who will try and take as much from their followers as they possibly can. 10 years after my initial experience, I luckily stumbled upon this article on Medium, which explained a lot of the questions I had been wrestling with for a decade. Had I read that article in 2007 or even a little later, I could have saved myself a lot of wasted tail chasing and simply gotten on with a good, solid, and beneficial secular meditation practice instead. Okay, so let's see what the article says. In a study done on Brazilian mediums, Newberg found that activity in hippocampus, the part of the brain involved in emotions and memory changes. In the case of expert mediums, it decreases. Lost in the awe at the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air seemed to merge to become one with the spirit power of life itself. Never had I been so intensely aware of the shape, the color of the individual leaves, the varied patterns of the veins that made each one unique. It was almost overpowering. Okay. Mystical experiences are thought to be encounters with great truths or powers, religious or not, depending on how each of us uniquely interprets this puzzling concept. Mystical experiences could take many shapes and forms. She asked different people about their own definition of sacred experiences: forging ties with God, entering a spiritual marriage, transcending the mundane confines of reality, fusing with the world. Okay, so these are scans of brains of Tibetan Buddhist meditators. It shows decreased activity in the parietal lobe. And the parietal lobe gives us a sense of orientation in space and time. Thus, the spacelessness and timelessness often reported in spiritual experiences. Mystical experiences can shake up your world in a single moment. In a study, 15 Carmelite nuns ages 23 to 64 were asked to relive the most spiritual moment in their lives, while functional magnetic resonance imaging scanned their brains. The research team concluded that brain structures such as the brainstem and parietal lobe fired off or shut down when the nuns were immersed in feelings of rapture. Since then, sophisticated forms of MRI, more advanced neuroimaging techniques, such as a single photon emission computerized tomography or tractography, have shed light on how transcendental experiences occur in the brain. Neuroscientists today are able to understand not only which parts of the brain orchestrate mystical experiences, but also the cognitive processes happening in various nodes and networks of the brain. We were even able to understand when a person gets into ecstasy mode. So it says a series of amino acid molecules bind to opioid receptors in the brain whose effect resembles that of opiates, intensifying pleasure and satisfaction and suppressing pain in the process. It is the abundance of dopamine in the brain that fills the person with unspoken satisfaction. These parts of the brain control our sense of self in relation to other objects in the world, as well as our bodily integrity, hence the out-of-body and extended self sensations. and perceptions many people who have had mystical experiences confess to. Scans of Franciscan nuns in prayer. Activity in the superior parietal lobe. The part of the brain responsible for our sense of orientation decreases significantly during prayer. What's her name? Long Island medium, Teresa Caputo. And they said when she would do a reading, her brain would enter meditation mode. So does that mean Teresa Caputo is not actually doing a reading because they can explain what is happening in the brain? Ends by saying, but if neuroscience can confidently explain what happens inside the brain when it registers superlative experiences, what does it have to say about why we have them in the first place? Are we all universally made to face spiritually transformative experiences at some point in our lives, or will prominent neuroscientists agree that some of us are born slightly more mystical? I just don't know how reading this turned him off to spirituality. I think a decrease of activity in the parietal lobe and an increase in dopamine is just part of the experience. How it happens. I don't think it rules out the spirituality side of it. What do you think?